Picture a 5-story building in Lower Manhattan. Not a nice building. A building that was never nice, not even when it was new. 6 apartments on every floor. 30 families in a space designed generously for 10. The walls sweating in summer. The pipes groaning in winter. 300 people living on top of each other with 1 toilet per floor and a courtyard that gets about 40 minutes of direct sunlight per day. Now fill that building with smell. Not one smell, not even 10. Dozens of them, layered like sediment, pressing against each other in the stairwell. Cabbage boiling somewhere on the 3rd floor. Garlic frying in chicken fat 2 doors down. A pot of bean soup that's been going since Tuesday. The sharp vinegar punch of pickles fermenting in an old barrel outside the door, because there's no room for it inside. And the smell of that barrel has now migrated into the hallway and isn't leaving until probably April. Add the smell of 14 unwashed men who've been standing at industrial sewing machines for 12 hours in a room with no ventilation. Add the smell of coal smoke from the stove that doesn't draw properly. Add the smell of 3 babies, a dog that isn't supposed to be here, and a man on the 5th floor who is making something called slivovitz in a jar under his bed, which is technically fermentation, technically illegal, and smells like something between fruit and fuel. That's the corner of Orchard and Hester, 1913. The most crowded block in the most crowded city in the Western Hemisphere. This is where somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 Jewish immigrants from Russia and Eastern Europe have crammed themselves into roughly 1 square mile of Lower Manhattan, the Lower East Side. You can walk the whole neighborhood in 40 minutes if nobody stops you. In reality, nobody has walked it in 40 minutes since 1890, because someone is always stopping you. A man selling pickles from a barrel that takes up 1/3 of the sidewalk. A woman dragging a cart of fabric remnants. A child chasing a chicken, a real, actual, live chicken, through the crowd while his grandmother shouts at him in Yiddish from 3 floors up. A city within a city. A world within a world, and at the centre of it, invisible and everywhere at once, the kitchen. Not one kitchen, every kitchen. The small, dark, coal-stained rooms where the real work of immigration happens. Where a woman stands at a stove in August heat and tries, with ingredients she barely recognises in a city she still doesn't understand, to cook something that tastes like before. That's what tonight's story's about. Not the factories, though we'll go there. Not the sweatshops, though we'll feel them. Not the parades or the politicians or the great men with their great ideas. Tonight we're in the kitchen. We're living it. One day, one person. Everything they touched, tasted, feared, remembered and hoped for. So, I make these history stories, long and quiet and built from details that most books don't stop for. And I honestly have no idea if people are actually sleeping to them, or if you're all just people who find comfort in hearing about a woman crying over incorrectly risen bread dough at 3 a.m. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. You've been here 5 months. 5 months since the boat. 5 months since Ellis Island, where a man who didn't speak Russian or Yiddish looked at your papers, looked at your eyes, looked at your hands, wrote something in a ledger, and waved you through. 5 months since your cousin Fanya met you at the gate with her husband Mordecai and took you to their apartment on Rivington Street, where 7 people slept in 3 rooms, and somehow this was considered fortunate. You came with a cloth bag, a sheepskin coat and a tin box your mother pressed into your hands on the dock at Hamburg. In the tin box, a handwritten recipe book in your mother's handwriting. 53 recipes, some of them her mother's, some of them older than that. Recipes for things you grew up eating. Recipes for the food that meant Friday night, that meant winter, that meant sick days and celebrations, and the particular smell of your family's kitchen, which is the smell of somewhere you will probably never see again. You are 19 years old. Your name is Sonia Levinsky. You're from a city called Bialystok, in what is technically the Russian Empire, and what everyone back home just calls Poland, and what the man at Ellis Island wrote down as Russia on your papers without asking. Your mother stood at a dock and watched a boat take you away and didn't cry, or at least not where you could see her, because crying meant doubt, and doubt meant maybe you wouldn't go. And if you didn't go, then all the money they borrowed, all the plans they made, all the courage they gathered over a winter and a spring would be wasted. So she didn't cry. You cried enough for both of you. Somewhere over the Atlantic, into a piece of fabric in a lower bunk in the women's steerage compartment, while around you 40 other women did the same thing in 4 different languages. But that was 5 months ago. Now you work for Mrs. Kaufman on Orchard Street. You found the job through a neighbour of Fanya's cousin, which is how everything works in the Lower East Side. It's not a city, it's a series of concentric circles of obligation, gossip and mutual survival. Someone always knows someone. The question is always whether that someone will help you or take advantage of you, and sometimes it's both. Mrs. Kaufman, Rivka Kaufman, 47 years old, from a village outside Lodz, in America 11 years, runs a boarding house on the 3rd floor of 138 Orchard Street. 14 men, all of them garment workers, most of them single or with wives and children still in Europe waiting to be sent for. They pay Mrs. Kaufman for a bed and 2 meals a day. Mornings, bread and butter and tea. Evenings, whatever Mrs. Kaufman decides to make, which is the real reason they pay. Mrs. Kaufman is a very good cook. She was a very good cook in Lodz, and she is a very good cook in New York, and she will be a very good cook wherever she ends up, because cooking isn't something she does, it's something she is. She can look at an onion and tell you whether to fry it or braise it. She can smell a pot from across the room and know if the salt is right. She can make a chicken last 3 days and have it be different each time and somehow always satisfying. You are not, by any objective measure, a very good cook. You're a decent cook. You learned by watching your mother, the way girls learned. You can make certain things properly. Potato soup, stuffed cabbage, a basic chala if given time and luck. You know roughly what you're doing in a kitchen. But Mrs. Kaufman doesn't hire you to cook. She hires you to chop and stir and carry and clean and peel and wash and run errands and generally make possible the production of 2 meals a day for 14 adult men who eat like they are afraid the food might be taken away at any moment, which many of them have good historical reasons to believe. Your wage is $3 a week, plus a cot in the back room near the kitchen. The cot is narrow. The back room smells permanently of yesterday's cooking and coal dust from the stove, and in winter there's a draft coming through a cracked wall that no amount of newspaper stuffed in the gap ever fully stops. You have slept in worse places. The cot is yours. That's what matters. Morning starts before it's morning. Mrs. Kaufman's internal clock does not recognize sleep as a permanent condition. At 5 o'clock, sometimes 4:30, something happens in her body that causes her to be awake, and about 6 minutes later you hear her in the kitchen, and 4 minutes after that the stove starts. You sleep through the first sounds. You've learned to. The way your body is adjusted to the permanent ambient noise of a building with 40 families in it. the baby on the floor above, the man who coughs, the couple who argues every evening at about 10, not with rage, but with the weary repetition of people who've been having the same argument for 20 years and have given up expecting it to resolve. But the stove you hear, the particular scrape of Mrs. Kaufman loading coal into the firebox, the groan of the door, the grunt she makes when the coal is damp and doesn't catch right, and then, a minute later, the change in the air, the first faint warmth beginning to press against the cold of the room. You get up. Your feet hit the floor, which is cold in a way that has never been properly described in any language, but which your feet have learned to anticipate the way a person anticipates a known discomfort. Not worse than expected, just exactly as bad. The room is dark except for a thread of orange-red light coming under the kitchen door. You find your clothes by feel, the same skirt and blouse you wear every day because you own 2 complete outfits, and one of them is the good one. You pull on your stocking standing up, which requires a particular kind of balance you've developed over 5 months. Your hair you pin quickly, approximately, enough to keep it out of your face and out of the food. You open the kitchen door. The heat hits you. This is summer, July specifically, the kind of New York July that feels like the city is slowly being cooked from underneath. The air outside is already heavy and wet at 5 in the morning, and Mrs. Kaufman's kitchen, with its coal stove and its south-facing wall, will be somewhere between very warm and genuinely alarming by noon. But at 5 in the morning, with the stove just starting, it's almost pleasant. The warmth against your skin after the cold of the back room, the orange glow of the fire through the stove's grate, the smell of coal smoke, and underneath it, the ghost smell of everything that was cooked yesterday and the day before and the day before that. Mrs. Kaufman is at the stove in her housecoat and slippers. She's a broad woman, not tall, with forearms that could crack walnuts, and hair that is iron grey and always pinned into submission before she starts cooking. She doesn't believe in cooking with loose hair. She doesn't believe in a lot of things, but this one she's particularly firm about. She doesn't look up when you come in. Water. This means fill the large pot, the one that lives on the stove's back burner, with water from the tap in the hall. The tap is shared between 4 apartments on this floor and produces water that is technically clean in the sense that the city says it is clean, and brown approximately twice a week, which is what happens when pipes have been in the ground since the Harrison administration. You take the pot. The hallway tap is cold and slow at this hour. You stand in the dim hallway in your stockings, you haven't put your shoes on yet, and wait while the pot fills, listening to the building. Somewhere above you, footsteps. One of the early shift workers, getting up for a 6 o'clock start. A door. The cough. Always the cough. A man on the 4th floor who has something in his lungs that doesn't sound right and has sounded this way since you arrived. The pot fills. You carry it back, both hands, your arms feeling the weight of it by the time you reach the kitchen. You're stronger than you were 5 months ago. The work has done that. Let's talk about breakfast, because breakfast is where you understand what this job actually is. 14 men, long shifts. They need food that stays with them. Every morning, bread. Not the light, airy bread that American bakeries produce, which the men eat and are hungry again in an hour. Heavy rye bread from Bernstein's bakery 3 blocks over, which Mrs. Kaufman sends you to buy every other day. You carry it back in 2 paper-wrapped loaves under each arm, still warm if you leave early enough. Butter, the real kind, not margarine. This is Mrs. Kaufman's position, and she holds it firmly, even though butter costs more. These men work 12 hours, she says. They need fat. Margarine is what you give people you don't care about. Tea. Always tea. The samovar, an actual copper samovar Mrs. Kaufman brought from Poland, whose entire history she will tell you if you listen long enough, sits on the shelf and produces tea throughout the day. Strong tea, dark enough to see your reflection in it, sweetened with sugar cubes held between the teeth, never stirred in. On Fridays, eggs, scrambled in Schmaltz, with onion. This takes about 40 minutes for 14 people, and requires your complete attention on the eggs, while Mrs. Kaufman handles the onions, because scrambled eggs for this many people at this heat have a window of perhaps 90 seconds between perfect and rubbery, and there is no coming back from rubbery. You've made them rubbery twice. Mrs. Kaufman said nothing both times. The men said nothing, but you saw their faces. You haven't made them rubbery since. The morning routine has a rhythm you've absorbed the way you absorb any routine, without noticing it happening, and then suddenly knowing it completely. Bread sliced before the men come in, tea already brewed, butter on the table in the shared bowl, 14 cups, 14 plates, 14 sets of silverware that are not actually silver, that are a mismatched collection, acquired over years through means Mrs. Kaufman describes as finding. The men come in staggered, between 5:30 and 6:30 depending on their shift. Some say good morning in Yiddish, Guten Morgen, some grunt. One man, Hirsch Rosenblum, who works pressing at the Triangle Shirtwaist on Washington Place, always says good morning in English with the exaggerated carefulness of someone practicing a language. Good morning, he says every morning, specifically to you, because you are the youngest person in the house, and therefore, in his mind, the most American, and therefore the best practice audience. Good morning, you say back, in English, also carefully. This is your English lesson. 14 garment workers and a landlady. There's something I need you to understand about what it meant to cook in the Lower East Side in 1913. It wasn't recreational. It wasn't a hobby or a passion project or something you did because you found it fulfilling. It was survival, not just in the metaphorical sense. Cooking was important to my people's cultural identity, but in the literal sense. If the food wasn't right, the boarders left. If the boarders left, Mrs. Kaufman didn't make rent. If Mrs. Kaufman didn't make rent, you didn't have a job. And if you didn't have a job, you were another girl heading to the factories. The factory was always there. It was always the alternative. The garment factories, the shirtwaist factories, the bindery, the laundry. There was always work if you wanted it. And you did not want it. Not after seeing what it did to the people who did it. Hirsch Rosenblum's hands. That's enough. Just look at his hands for 5 seconds and you understand why you will wake up at 4:30 in the morning every day for the rest of your life if that's what staying out of the factory requires. His fingers are crooked in a way that didn't start out crooked. The calluses aren't in places that make sense for human anatomy. He's been pressing fabric for 8 years and his hands have adapted to the work the way wood adapts to water, warped in ways that can't be reversed. Good hands for the machine, he says once when he catches you looking. Bad hands for everything else. He's 31 years old. You're more careful with the eggs the next morning. By 8 o'clock, breakfast is done, the dishes are washed and it's time to shop. Mrs. Kaufman gives you money and tells you the list. Not writes it, tells you, because the list exists only in her head. calibrated to exactly what 14 men need to eat well for the cost that makes the math work. The math. Let's talk about the math. She charges her boarders $1.50 per week for bed and 2 meals. 14 men, $21 a week in income. Subtract rent. $8 a month. Call it $2 a week. Subtract coal. Subtract soap. Subtract everything else. What remains has to feed 14 men 2 meals a day, 7 days a week, pay your $3 wage, and provide whatever Mrs. Kaufman is saving toward bringing her sister's family from Lodz. This is a precise operation. There is no fat in the budget, which is ironic, because fat, specifically Schmaltz, rendered chicken fat, is the central cooking medium of this kitchen, and is itself carefully hoarded, rendered slowly on Sundays from the week's accumulated chicken scraps, poured into a jar, kept on a shelf above the stove where it solidifies white in winter and stays soft and amber all summer. Schmaltz is not just a cooking fat. Here, at this time, it is a kind of currency. The difference between a dish cooked in Schmaltz and a dish cooked in water is the difference between a meal and calories. You can taste the difference. The men can taste the difference. Mrs. Kaufman's mood tracks with the level of the Schmaltz jar in a way you've learned to read like a barometer. Half full, all is well. Quarter full and it's Wednesday. She'll be efficient but not inspired. Nearly empty on a Friday. Everyone walk carefully. Hester Street, in July. You've been here enough times now that it doesn't hit you the same way it did the first morning, when you came out of the subway and turned the corner, and your senses were simply not equipped for what they encountered. The noise, the specific, layered, impossible noise of a street market that has been operating continuously since roughly 1880. Hundreds of vendors with their pushcarts, each one calling their goods in a mix of Yiddish, English, Russian, Polish, Hungarian, the cries, overlapping until they become a kind of music if you listen to them right, or a headache if you don't. Herring, fresh herring, apples, scent an apple, buttons, laces, ribbons, chickens, live chickens. The live chicken vendor is 3 carts down on the right, and you smell it before you see it. The particular concentrated smell of live poultry in summer heat, which is not a smell that encourages charitable feelings toward your fellow creatures, but which you have learned to walk through without flinching. Because the chicken on the other side of that smell is the difference between a pot of soup that has something in it and a pot of soup that is mostly vegetables. Hester Street is also where you can buy things that don't exist anywhere else in New York City. The exact variety of dried mushrooms that grow in the forest of Galicia, which no American grocery store has ever stocked. The right kind of black bread, dense and slightly sour. Not the soft American rye that looks similar but tastes like a polite suggestion of what rye bread could be. Sour cream that actually has the right tang, not the American version, which is thinner and somehow apologetic, but the real kind, thick and sharp and cold even in July, kept in a clay pot. This is where the Lower East Side's collective insistence on its own tastes has created a market that serves those tastes. Because the immigrants didn't become American the way politicians hoped, they didn't stop wanting the things they grew up with. They found a way to have those things here, imperfectly, imprecisely, at extra cost and extra effort. The taste of home in a jar on a shelf, in a city that otherwise wanted them to forget they were from anywhere. You have a list in your head, one whole chicken from Shlomo the poultry man, whose birds are smaller than the ones you knew at home, but whose prices are negotiable if you arrive before 9. You've learned to come early and look at the chickens with a skeptical expression before agreeing to buy, which causes Shlomo to offer first his second price, then his real price. The first price is for people who don't know better. The second is for people he sees sometimes. The real price is what he charges Mrs. Kaufman's girl, which is what you are now. 3 pounds of potatoes from the cart at the corner. American potatoes. They grow larger than the ones at home but have less flavour, more water, less starch, which matters enormously when you're making potato kugel, and the kugel comes out wrong, and you know exactly why, but there's nothing to be done about it. Onions. Always onions. The foundation of everything. If Mrs. Kaufman's kitchen had a coat of arms, it would be an onion. A bunch of dill from the woman with the herb cart near the pickle barrel, who grows her own herbs on the fire escape of her apartment building and sells them loosely wrapped in damp newspaper, still smelling of the fire escape and the summer morning. And if the money allows, dried mushrooms, the Polish kind, porcini adjacent, wrinkled and dark and intensely, almost violently, aromatic. They cost more than fresh mushrooms. Everything worth having costs more than its substitute. But they are the secret in the Friday night mushroom barley soup that makes the men go quiet when they eat it. That particular specific quiet that means, this tastes like somewhere I used to be. You spend 14 minutes negotiating the price of dried mushrooms with Mr. Birnbaum, who's been selling dried mushrooms on Hester Street since 1907, and whose prices are firm, fixed, and completely non-negotiable, until suddenly they're not. You leave with a paper bag of mushrooms for 11 cents instead of 14. Mrs. Kaufman will not mention this, but she'll notice. On the way back, your arms full, you stop, not because you want to, because you can't walk through the pickle barrel smell without stopping for a moment and doing what you always do. Stand there and smell it. The pickle barrels, open wooden barrels on the sidewalk full of cucumbers fermenting in brine with dill and garlic. They've been fermenting for different amounts of time. Some 3 days, not quite sour yet, still crisp. The brine just beginning its work. Some 2 weeks. Properly sour, the cucumber gone soft inside and sharp outside. Some a month, very sour, dark, puckering. Your grandmother had a barrel in her courtyard. You know this smell the way you know your own name. You stand on the sidewalk in July with chickens and potatoes and mushrooms in your arms, with the noise of Hester Street happening in every direction, and you smell pickle brine, and for approximately 45 seconds you're 10 years old and standing in your grandmother's courtyard, watching her pull a cucumber from the barrel and cut it on the wooden board, the brine running across the board and dripping onto the stones. Your grandmother died 4 years ago. You will never see the courtyard again. You stand there for 45 seconds. Then you shift the weight of the chicken, readjust your grip on the potato bag, and keep walking. Back in the kitchen, Mrs. Kaufman is already working. She never goes to the market herself. She sends you, because leaving the kitchen means leaving the stove, and leaving the stove means losing control of the schedule. Mrs. Kaufman's relationship with her schedule is like a captain's relationship with a ship. She is in charge, everything else is in service of that, and the idea of the schedule making its own decisions while she's not watching is something she finds personally threatening. The chicken goes immediately into Mrs. Kaufman's hands. She holds it up, examines it, pinches the breast, rotates it in a way that suggests she is having a private conversation with the chicken that you're not invited to, and then nods once. Good. Potatoes? She checks the potatoes the same way. The mushroom she holds up to her nose and closes her eyes for a moment. Good, she says again. High praise. The kitchen is small. It's always small. New York tenement kitchens are not designed for the kind of cooking that happens in them. The stove takes up one wall. The prep table takes another. There's a shelf, a cupboard, a single window that looks onto the airshaft between buildings. The airshaft provides approximately 30 minutes of direct light per day and a reliable delivery system for the sounds of every other kitchen on every other floor. From down below, someone's onions hitting a hot pan, the hiss and spit of it, the smell of oil heating. From above, a baby crying, and underneath that, the thin, reedy sound of someone singing in a language you think might be Romanian. The kitchen is dark by 10 o'clock in the morning, when the sun moves past the slice of sky visible from the airshaft window. Mrs. Kaufman works by the light of the fire and single gas lamp she lights at 9 and keeps burning until she's done, regardless of the cost, because she says you cannot cook in the dark, and she's right. Today is Thursday, which means the Friday Shabbos cooking has already begun in some forms. The chicken, bought this morning, will be partly for tonight's simple meal and partly for tomorrow's proper Shabbos dinner, which is the meal that matters, the one the men wait for all week, the meal that is supposed to feel, or at least approximate the feeling of, home, family, something that used to exist. Mrs. Kaufman takes the chicken to the sink. She washes it with the thoroughness of someone who has done this 10,000 times, but treats it as if this specific chicken specifically deserves thoroughness. Her hands move over it with attention, checking the skin, running fingers along the joints, the particular way she handles the neck that always slightly unnerved you until you understood it wasn't strange. It was respect, or something adjacent to respect. Watch, she says, not, come watch me. Just watch. The assumption is that you will. You watch. The secret to a good broth, she says, not looking up, beginning to quarter the chicken with a knife so sharp it seems almost unnecessary. The knife doing almost no work at all, just confirming the chicken's intention to separate along its natural lines. The secret is time. Americans want to cook a chicken for an hour and have soup. You can't make anything in an hour. An hour is nothing. An hour is just the chicken deciding whether to participate. She drops the pieces into the large pot, the water you brought in this morning. 3 hours, she says. Minimum, better 4. Then you have something. She adds, 1 whole onion, skin on, because the skin is where the gold colour comes from. A parsnip, a carrot, a piece of celery root. Today she doesn't have any, so the celery stalk goes in instead, and she accepts the compromise. Salt. Nothing else yet. Not the mushrooms, not the dill. Those come later, at specific moments she holds entirely in her head. The pot goes on the back of the stove at a temperature that is not a boil, not even a simmer, just the occasional bubble breaking the surface, like the pot is thinking rather than cooking. Mrs. Kaufman wipes her hands on her apron and turns to you. Potatoes. Peel them. You peel potatoes. There's a tin box on the shelf above your cot. You know every recipe in it by heart by now. Have read them so many times in the 5 months since you arrived that the pages already soft from your mother's years of handling them have softened further from yours. Their handwriting is your mother's. Small, careful, the letters of a woman who learned to write as an adult and treated the skill with the respect you give to something hard won. The recipes are in Yiddish, with occasional Russian words where she couldn't find the right Yiddish one. or where the Russian word was the one that felt correct, the one her own mother used. Recipe for tzimmes, for cholent, for stuffed cabbage. The kind with a sweet tomato sauce, a specific ratio of sweet to sour she calibrated over years. For honey cake, likash, for Rosh Hashanah, for mushroom barley soup, for gefilte fish, but a particular regional variation from her village, with more pepper and a specific proportion of carp to pike that she considers non-negotiable. Every recipe has annotations, not in margins. She wrote in the spaces between lines when she added something, cross-referencing, updating. Do not use the large onion. Use 2 small ones. They are sweeter. In summer, add less vinegar. In winter, more. Your grandmother adds a spoonful of rendered goose fat to this. I don't think it's necessary, but she disagrees and she is 70 years old, so perhaps she is right. The recipes are also, you've realized slowly, letters. Not letters in the direct sense. They don't say, I love you, or I miss you. Your mother wasn't that kind of woman and those weren't that kind of recipes. But they say other things. The way the handwriting changes on the honey cake recipe, more careful, slightly formal, tells you she copied it from someone else's book, probably her mother-in-law's, probably before she fully trusted herself to adapt it. The smudges on the stuffed cabbage page tell you it was made while the recipe was open, which means it was a new recipe once, uncertain, not yet automatic. And one recipe, the last one in the book, written in slightly larger letters than the others, potato soup, simple, for when everything is hard. 4 ingredients, potatoes, onion, water, salt, directions in 3 lines, nothing unnecessary. This is the one you think about most. The problem is that the potatoes are different. This is the thing nobody told you about leaving your country to go to another. Everything there is made from slightly different materials. The flour is different. American flour is lighter, bleached, or a different wheat variety, or both, and it behaves differently than the flour your mother used, which came from a mill in a village 12 kilometers from your house, and had a particular smell and a particular weight and absorbed liquid in a particular way you knew without thinking, because you'd been handling it since you were old enough to stand at the table. American flour looks similar. When you hold it in your hand, it feels similar. But when you add it to dough, it makes different dough. Not bad dough, just different. The chala rises more quickly and has a lighter crumb. Some people consider this better. You consider it wrong. The butter is different, slightly less rich, or perhaps less salted. It's hard to know exactly why, but it doesn't taste the same as the butter from the small farm outside your town, churned in the morning and wrapped in cloth, which was almost yellow in summer when the cows were on grass. The milk is different. The eggs are different, bigger, which should be better, but somehow comes out wrong in recipes calibrated for smaller eggs. You end up with things slightly too eggy, or have to remember to use fewer than the recipe says, and then feel you're betraying the recipe. The chickens are different, bigger, bred for meat in a way that means the bones give less flavour to broth. You compensate by cooking longer, add in more vegetables, reducing the pot so it concentrates. It takes 3 weeks to figure out this adjustment. For 3 weeks the soup is good, but not right. On the 4th week, it's right. And you don't tell Mrs. Kaufman what you changed, because she would think the original approach was wrong, and you don't want her to think that. The water is different. This sounds impossible until you think about what water is made of. Whatever is in the ground, the pipes, the air. New York water has chlorine in it since 1910. a thin chemical presence in the background of everything you cook with it. You can barely taste it. Sometimes you can't taste it at all, but bread made with New York water has a different flavour at the edges than bread made with water from the well outside your grandmother's house. And you know this even if you can't prove it and no one would believe you. You're cooking in translation. Every recipe is a translation. The mushroom barley soup. This is the one you're making today for tonight's dinner. It is the one you are most particular about, because it is the one that, when you get it right, makes something happen in the kitchen. You've noticed this. When the soup is right, really right, the way your mother made it, the men are quiet when they eat it. Not the uncomfortable quiet of bad food or awkward silence. The other kind. The kind where someone is somewhere else in their mind for a moment, back in a kitchen, smelling something from before. The mushrooms are the key. The dried mushrooms from Hester Street. You add them to the stock early. Let them rehydrate slowly in the broth, releasing their specific dark, earthy, almost smoky flavour into the liquid. American fresh mushrooms don't do this. Button mushrooms, the kind in every American grocery, add a mild, pleasant mushroom taste and nothing else. Nice. Correct. Wrong. The dried Polish mushrooms add something with depth, a bottom note, a bass line under the soup's melody. While the mushrooms soak, you cut the vegetables, carrot, parsnip, onion. Not large pieces. Mrs. Kaufman is specific about this. The vegetables should disappear into the soup, she says. You should taste them, not see them. This is not a stew. The pearl barley goes in early because it needs time, and it needs to give the soup its body. That thick, almost glutinous quality that means the spoon stands up slightly in the bowl, that the soup coats your throat when you swallow, that the hunger it satisfies is immediate and complete. Salt. You taste. More salt. Mrs. Kaufman comes to taste. She takes the spoon, dips it, blows on it carefully, tastes. More dill, she says. And the pepper. You add more dill, you add pepper, you taste again. Now, she says, and walks away. The soup cooks. At noon, there's a knock at the service door. A girl, your age, maybe younger. Dark hair, sharp face. A coat too heavy for July because she only has one coat. Basket over her arm. Mrs. Kaufman, I have challahs from Bernstein's. Mrs. Kaufman is not in the kitchen. She's taken her afternoon 20 minutes, which she spends standing at the front window looking at Orchard Street below. A habit you've come to understand is less rest, and more the way a general surveys their territory. Leave them, you say. She'll pay you later. The girl puts the challahs on the table. 2 of them, large, braided properly, tops glossy with egg wash, still just barely warm from the oven. The smell of fresh bread hits the kitchen like something physical. You stand there for a moment after she leaves, just smelling it. There is something specifically powerful about fresh-baked challah on a Thursday afternoon. It's not just bread. It's the promise of Friday. It's the message that the week's work is almost done. That in 24 hours there will be wine and candles, and the particular stillness that Mrs. Kaufman creates in the apartment on Friday evenings, when even the most harried of the boarders manages to wash his face and sit down and be, for an hour, somewhere closer to human than the factory permits. You are going to peel more potatoes. You peel them. But you're thinking about the challah. You start your own challah at 1:30. This is not in your job description. Mrs. Kaufman orders them from Bernstein's because she doesn't have time, and she's made peace with this, even though Bernstein's challahs are good but not hers. But you have a gap in the schedule. The soup is going, the potatoes are resting, the chicken is hours from dinner, and you have in your head the recipe from your mother's book, batch you've been reading every night for 2 weeks but haven't made since you arrived. You pull out the tin box from your cot, bring the recipe to the kitchen, prop it open. Your mother's challah, flour, yeast, eggs, oil, salt, sugar. The amounts she lists. The notes. The dough should feel like a baby's ear. If it's sticky, add a little flour. If it's stiff, your hands need to work harder. The dough will tell you what it needs. Listen to it. You listen to it. The dough comes together under your hands, flour white to the wrists, which you don't notice because you've stopped thinking about your hands. The yeast is working. You can feel it in the texture, the slight alive quality of the dough as it responds to the warmth of your palms. You push into it with the heel of your hand, fold it, turn it, push again. 8 minutes. 10. The dough changes under your hands, becomes smoother, more elastic, more willing, less sticky. It starts to feel like a baby's ear. You stop. Hold the dough ball for a moment. Your hands know this, not your memory. Your hands know it. Some kind of cellular knowledge that transferred from your mother to your hands without going through your brain. You set it to rise in a bowl near the stove. Mrs. Kaufman comes back into the kitchen 20 minutes later. She sees the bowl, sees the flour on the counter, says nothing for a moment. What are you making? Chala, my mother's recipe. I have a gap in the... Use the marble board. The dough sticks less on marble. She takes the marble board from the shelf, a heavy slab that comes out only for special doughs, and sets it on the counter. Goes to the stove, checks the soup, adjusts the temperature in a way that involves placing her hand over the pot for exactly 2 seconds, then turning the damper on the stove 1/4 turn. She doesn't say, "You can use this time." She doesn't say, "This is a good idea." She doesn't say anything, but she got the marble board. At 3:30 the chala comes out of the oven. Mrs. Kaufman is at the counter chopping vegetables. She doesn't turn around immediately. The chala is good. You know it's good before you cut it. The colour right, the braiding tight, the top golden and slightly cracked along the braid lines the way it should be. The smell is... It smells like home, says a voice from the doorway. You turn. One of the boarders, Mendel Gross, who works in a garment factory on Spring Street, who you have spoken to approximately 6 times in 5 months. A quiet man with a thin face and eyes that are thoughtful in a way that sometimes makes you uncomfortable because it feels like being read. He's standing in the kitchen doorway. Not supposed to be in the kitchen. This is Mrs. Kaufman's domain. Holding his hat in his hands. I smelled it from the hall, he says, slightly apologetically. He looks at the challah. He looks at it the way you looked at the pickle barrels this morning. My mother made that kind, he says. The braid in 3, not 4. Your mother does it in 3. Bernstein's does it in 4. You don't know what to say. Sit down, Mrs. Kaufman says, without turning round. You can have a piece when it cools. At dinner, 7 men sit at the long table in the front room and 7 more in the adjacent room, eating in shifts because the table doesn't fit 14. Tonight, mushroom barley soup, with the challah you made and the one from Bernstein's, cold chicken from this morning's cooking, and a cucumber salad with the sharp brine dressing that Mrs. Kaufman makes from the last of the barrel pickles, fresh dill, and a pinch of sugar. The men eat, you serve and watch. Hirsch Rosenblum, the one who practices English every morning, takes a piece of your challah and eats it standing at the counter while waiting for the soup, which is not how you're supposed to eat. And Mrs. Kaufman says nothing because it's clear he doesn't know he's doing it. He's somewhere else while he chews. His eyes have that look. You see Mendel Gross taste the soup and hold it in his mouth for a moment. You see what this is. This is not food service. This is not hospitality. This is something else. These men work 12 hours a day in buildings that will, some of them, burn down. They live in rooms the size of closets. They send money home every week to wives and children they haven't seen in 2 years, 3 years, sometimes more. They are building a life in a country that treats them in general as raw material for its factories, useful, necessary, and not particularly important. And every evening they come back to this kitchen, and the kitchen smells like the one thing that hasn't changed. The garlic and the onion and the dill and the yeast, the mushrooms from Poland, the challah braided in 3, not 4. The kitchen is the only room in New York City where they don't have to translate themselves. After dinner, you wash dishes, 40 minutes, 14 men's worth, using water heated on the stove and a soap that smells like lye and strips the skin from your knuckles if you do it every day, which you do. Your hands by now are dry and slightly cracked at the joints. You rub chicken fat on them before bed. Mrs. Kaufman recommended this, and she was right, and it feels worse than it sounds, and they've stopped being painful. Mostly. In cold weather, they remind you of what they've been through. While you wash, Leah, the Friday helper, comes to dry. She's your age, from Vilna, works in a shirtwaist factory on Green Street during the week. Her hands are cracked for different reasons. She talks while she dries, quickly, quietly, about a labour organiser who came to the factory this week and held a meeting in the alley after the shift ended. He said we should strike, she says. He said we have the right to a 60-hour week instead of 70. 60 hours, you say. I know. You both know what 60 hours means. You're doing the math differently. Not less work than 70, but more than 0, which is what you'd have if you lost the job. Did you sign anything? No. A pause. She dries a bowl with the particular efficiency of someone who dried dishes professionally. My supervisor watches. She knows who went to the meeting. She's making a list. You know about the lists. Girls who got put on lists, blacklisted from factories, which sounds abstract until you understand that in the Lower East Side in 1913, if you can't get factory work, the alternatives are not good alternatives. Be careful, you say. I am careful, she says. She holds up her hands, the cracked skin, the stiffness at the wrist from the machine. I'm just also tired. You don't have an answer for that. After the dishes, after Mrs. Kaufman has put the kitchen to rights, she always does this herself, last thing every night, a ritual inspection ensuring everything is ready for 5 o'clock. There is sometimes an hour before sleep. Sometimes you sit in the back room. In summer you go to the roof. The roof is, in July, the closest thing to tolerable that New York offers. The air up there is not clean. Still New York air, carrying its permanent cargo of coal smoke and water vapour and the smell of 2 million people in a small space. But it moves. There's a breeze from the river if the night is right. You climb the stairs. The door sticks. You shoulder it open and step out into the night. The city. You always pause here. Not because it's beautiful, though it is in its way. Because it requires a pause. Because Manhattan at night from a rooftop is information. Too much, too fast, requiring a moment to sort through. The lights first. Gas lamps on the streets below, their light orange and irregular. Electric lights in some commercial buildings, white and cold and different. Windows in every direction. The small warm rectangles of kitchen windows, bedroom windows, the larger lit windows of restaurants and shops on Orchard Street that stay open late, and above all of it, the bridge. The Williamsburg Bridge, 2 blocks east, its lights strung across the darkness over the East River. Cables like wires of light, the towers rising above everything around them. You've crossed it twice on foot because walking is free and the ferry costs a nickel you usually can't spare. And each time you cross it, you have the same feeling. The feeling of being in between, suspended over water between Manhattan and Brooklyn, which are 2 places that feel like 2 different cities, neither one and neither the other. You're also in between things. You stand on the roof of the building on Orchard Street and look at the bridge and understand yourself in terms of geography. You are somewhere. You're not where you were. You're not yet whatever you're becoming. A cat appears. It comes from behind the water tank, the wooden water tank that sits on stilts in the corner of every New York rooftop. The cat is black with a white chest, and it regards you with the supreme indifference of a New York street cat, which is a creature that has decided most humans are neither threatening nor useful, but occasionally revises its assessment. You sit down on the tar of the roof, still warm from the day's sun. The cat sits 2 feet away, does not approach, does not leave. You take out the recipe book. It's too dark to read properly. But you don't need to read it. You've read it so many times that the pages are familiar in your hands even in the dark. Your mother made this book in the year before you left. Over a winter, writing in the evenings after dinner, adding recipes as she thought of them. You watched her without understanding what she was making. You thought she was writing notes for herself. It was only on the dock when she pressed it into your hands that you understood. It was the kitchen. She gave you the kitchen. Not the kitchen itself. Not the cast-iron stove she'd cooked on for 20 years. Not the marble rolling pin. Not the copper pot that hung above the stove and reflected the firelight all winter. Those things were too heavy, too permanent, too much part of the house. But this, the knowledge of the kitchen, the sequence of things, the smells and temperatures and textures and adjustments that constitute a way of cooking, which is to say, a way of being home. She pressed it into your hands and didn't cry, and watched the boat take you away. You open the book in the dark and run your fingers over the pages. The cat moves 3 inches closer. Friday begins the same way. 5 o'clock. Coal in the stove, water from the hall tap. But Friday is different. The kitchen knows it's Friday. This is not mystical. It's the accumulation of tasks and smells and the particular way Mrs. Kaufman moves through the space, which is slightly more deliberate than other days, slightly more focused. Friday has a deadline that other days don't have. Sundown. Shabbos begins at sundown, which means everything that needs to be cooked must be finished before then. In July, this gives you until approximately 8 o'clock. In December, it gives you until 4:30, which is a situation that has caused Mrs. Kaufman to use language you didn't expect on one occasion when the cholent wasn't ready. The cholent. This is the dish that defines Friday in this kitchen, in every Jewish kitchen on every floor of every building in a square mile. Cholent is a slow stew, bean and barley and meat if you have it, cooked overnight in a low oven, sealed tightly so nothing escapes, left to cook from before Shabbos until the midday meal the next day. Because you're not supposed to cook on Shabbos, not supposed to light fires, not supposed to do the work of cooking. The cholent does the cooking itself, slowly through the night and the morning, arriving at the table at noon on Saturday as something that has been transforming for 16 hours. The secret is time. Everything Mrs. Kaufman makes has this as its secret. She starts the Colent Thursday evening, soaking the beans, great white beans, fat and starchy, soaking in cold water overnight in the largest pot in the kitchen. By Friday morning they've absorbed enough water to have swelled to twice their size, and they smell like rain-soaked ground, or the inside of a root cellar, clean and cool and vegetable. On top of the beans, pearl barley, potatoes cut in large pieces, onion, garlic. If there's beef, sometimes there is when the budget allows, usually a tough cheap cut that will become tender through long cooking. It goes in whole. Not cut, because cutting means losing the juices. Paprika, pepper, the special spice mixture that Mrs. Kaufman measures into her palm and adds to the pot with a gesture so routine she doesn't look at it. Just the palm, the eyeball judgment, the adjustment. What's in that, you asked the first Friday. Spices. Which ones? She looked at you. The right ones. This was not an evasion. It was a complete answer. The right ones are whatever makes it right. She doesn't measure them. She's measured them by eye and nose for 30 years, and the number she arrives at is the right number. Writing it down would not help you understand it. You're trying to understand it. Every Friday you watch. Every Friday you note what she takes from which shelf, the order of it, the quantities as best you can estimate from the way she cups her palm. You're building a recipe in your head that may never be exactly right, because it lives in the hands, not the head. But it's getting closer. The fire at the Scholent pot. This is the part people don't think about when they talk about Shabbos cooking. The part that isn't in the religious texts or the recipe books, the fire. Before Shabbos, Mrs. Kaufman sets the stove to a specific temperature and banking, a specific arrangement of coal that will burn at exactly the right rate for 16 hours. Too hot and the Scholent burns. Too cold and it doesn't cook through properly. You end up with half-raw beans at noon on Saturday, which is not a catastrophe but is a failure, and Mrs. Kaufman does not accept failures. The art of banking a coal fire for overnight cooking is a skill that takes years to learn, and that modern people have essentially lost. You're learning it. You're perhaps halfway to understanding it, which means you can do it acceptably when Mrs. Kaufman guides you and make a respectable attempt unsupervised, though she always adjusts it anyway. You're setting it too hot, she sees, but it's cold today. The oven holds heat. You're thinking about the fire, not the oven. The oven remembers. Set it as if it's warm. You adjust. She watches without comment, which means the adjustment was right. At 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, something happens to the kitchen. It has been happening every Friday since you arrived, and you've been waiting for the words to describe it. It's a quality of air, a change in the pace. Not slower exactly, but more deliberate. The pots are going, the bread is baked, the table is set with the white cloth that comes out only on Fridays, the one Mrs. Kaufman washes every week and presses with a flat iron heated on the stove. The candles are in their holders. Mrs. Kaufman washes her hands, goes to her room, returns in a better dress. Still plain, still dark, but clean and pressed. A dress that says, "This is different." She covers her hair with a white cloth. She lights the candles, 2 of them, in the pewter candlesticks that came from Lodz, wrapped carefully in clothing in her luggage 11 years ago, surviving the Atlantic crossing and the inspection at Ellis Island and 11 years of New York. Still exactly the same pewter candlesticks her mother lit candles in, and her mother before that. Going back to however many generations of women doing the same thing in smaller and smaller towns, until you reach the beginning of the practice and can't go further. She puts her hands over the candles and moves them in the circular gesture 3 times. Then she covers her eyes and says the blessing. In this moment, in this kitchen, in this building full of garment workers and crying babies, and the smell of 14 different pots on 14 different stoves, something happens that you have no word for in English and an imprecise word for in Yiddish. Shabbos. The week is over. You can rest. On a Sunday in August, on your half-day off, you try to make your mother's stuffed cabbage. Mrs. Kaufman has given you the use of the kitchen from 1 to 4. She visits her sister on Sundays. This allows you the kitchen, and, more than that, the privacy of cooking without being observed, which is its own kind of freedom. You have the recipe book open on the counter. You read it twice before beginning, though you know it by heart. Stuffed cabbage, holishkis, the sweet sour tomato sauce, the particular proportion of sweet to sour your mother calibrated over years, the filling of rice and ground meat and onion that has to be mixed in a specific order, the onion first so it doesn't make the meat too wet. The cabbage from Hester Street is good. Large, firm heads, outer leaves intact. You blanch them in boiling water until they're pliable, enough to roll without breaking. The meat, ground beef from the butcher on Essex Street, whose prices are slightly higher than the cart on Rivington, but whose quality is more reliable. You've been saving this week's leftover kitchen money. Pennies, literally, pennies added together over a week, for this specific purchase. The rice, you cook it until it's almost done. Not completely done. The fill-in will cook more inside the cabbage leaves, and if you start with fully cooked rice, you end with mush. Your mother's note. The rice should still have a tiny fight in it. A tiny fight. You cook the rice until it still has a tiny fight in it. The onion, finely chopped, cooked in a spoonful of Schmaltz until golden and soft. The smell fills the kitchen. The smell that is the basement note of so much of what you cook. The sweet caramel edge of onion in fat. You stand at the stove and stir, and the smell goes directly to somewhere behind your sternum. The filling. You mix it in the bowl. Your mother says to mix it with your hands. The spoon doesn't feel. Your hands feel. You'll know when it's right. So you use your hands, the meat and rice and onion coming together under your fingers, the cold of the raw meat against your palms, the resistance of it. It feels right. You roll the cabbage. This is the part that requires the particular dexterity of a childhood spent watching and eventually doing. The flat cabbage leaf on the board, the spoonful of filling in the centre, the sides folded over, the roll tight enough to hold through the cooking but not so tight it splits. You've done this before with your mother many times. Your hands know the motion. 12 rolls, arranged in the pot in 2 layers, seam side down so they don't unravel. The sauce. Tomato. Canned tomatoes, because fresh tomatoes in August cost more than canned, and there's no difference in the cooking. With sugar, lemon juice, onion, and something your mother's recipe calls the sweet-sour adjustment. Enough sweet, then add sour until it fights the sweet, then add a little more sweet until the sweet wins, but only just. You taste. Add sugar, add lemon, taste again, add lemon, add sugar. The sauce is fighting itself, the sweet and sour struggling for position, until the sweet wins but only just. You taste. Almost. You add half a teaspoon of sugar. The sweet wins. The sauce goes over the cabbage rolls. The lid goes on. The pot goes on the back of the stove at low heat. 2 hours. The kitchen fills with the specific smell of stuffed cabbage cooking. which is a smell so particular and so loaded that you have to sit down for a minute when it fully reaches you. At 4 o'clock you take the lid off. The cabbage rolls are soft, slightly dark at the edges where the sauce is reduced. The liquid in the pot is a deep reddish brown. You take one roll out, transfer it carefully to a plate, pour sauce over it. You eat standing at the counter, which is not how your mother would want you to eat this. It is very good. It is close. It is not right. You stand at the counter and try to identify the thing that's wrong. It's not the cabbage. It's not the meat or the rice. The sauce is close. Very close. There's something underneath it. A flavour that's missing. Or an absence that shouldn't be there. You eat another bite. Think. The tomatoes. They're not the same tomatoes. Your mother used fresh tomatoes from the garden behind the house, which grew in the particular soil of that particular place, ripened in that particular sun. You can't replicate that with canned American tomatoes, which are fine tomatoes, good tomatoes, just not those tomatoes, not the ones grown in the black earth of that specific garden. Or maybe it's the water, probably the water. The taste of place is in the water. Or maybe it's the stove. The cast iron stove in your mother's kitchen absorbed 30 years of seasoning, the oils and fats and spices of 30 years of cooking, layered into the iron, releasing something into everything cooked on it. Mrs. Kaufman's stove is 15 years old, already halfway to developing its own character. Your mother's stove was its own ecosystem. Or maybe it's none of these things. Maybe the recipe requires your mother's hands, specifically as an ingredient. And that particular ingredient is not available in New York City in 1913, and will not be available no matter what you do. You stand there for a moment with this thought. Then you eat the rest of the stuffed cabbage roll. It is very good. It is not right. Both of these things can be true at once. You're learning this. On Sundays you sometimes walk. Not on all Sundays. Not when there's work to catch up on. Not when it's raining. But on good Sundays, after the morning cleaning, you take your coat and walk north along the east side. The neighbourhood changes as you walk. Below Hester Street, the Jewish quarter, every sign in Yiddish and Russian and Hebrew, every smell familiar, a world that has recreated itself wholesale from the materials of somewhere else. Above Houston, Italian immigrants, their own world with its own rules and its own smells, tomato sauce and garlic and the sweet fermented smell of wine being made in building basements, which is technically illegal and which everyone pretends not to notice. The Italian word for bread in a bakery window. The specific orange red of dried, peppers hanging in strings outside a grocery. Further north, other neighbourhoods, German, Hungarian, Greek, each community a country in miniature, each with its own market, its own food, its own version of home condensed into an American city block. Manhattan in 1913 is not a melting pot. That's the phrase they use in the newspapers and the speeches. The melting pot. Everyone goes indifferent. Everyone comes out American. But walking these streets, you understand that this isn't what's happening. Or at least it isn't what's happening yet. Maybe it happens to the next generation, the children, the ones being born in these tenements who will go to American schools and speak English without an accent and eventually not know the exact taste of their grandmother's stuffed cabbage. For this generation, your generation, the arrivals, the ones who remember, the Lower East Side is not a melting pot. It's 40 different kitchens, 40 different attempts to keep the old country's taste alive in a place where the ingredients are wrong. But here's the thing you've been thinking about. The Italian woman on the second floor of Mrs. Kaufman's building who makes tomato sauce every Sunday, her sauce is not Italian. Not exactly. She's adapted it to American tomatoes, American garlic, the conditions of a New York kitchen. It's a translation. The Greek family on Delancey Street who makes spanakopita in a pan too big for their oven and has to cook it in batches. They've changed the proportions, the timing, because their oven is different from the ovens in Thessaloniki. Every kitchen on every block is making this adaptation, keeping what can be kept, changing what has to change, inventing new things in the gaps. In 50 years, the food they're making now will be called American food, Jewish American food, Italian American food. It will have its own name. People will seek it out and consider it authentic. It won't be authentic. Not exactly, not in the way it was, but it will be something. On a Sunday in September, Mendel Gross asks if you've been to the Brooklyn Bridge. He appears in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands, his apology gesture. Mrs. Kaufman isn't here, you say. I know, I wanted to ask you something. You keep kneading the bread. He stands in the doorway. Have you walked across the Brooklyn Bridge? No. You should. He pauses. It's important. I don't know how to explain it. You should just see it. He goes away. 2 Sundays later, on a cool October day when the heat has finally broken and New York smells like something other than itself, you go. You take the streetcar as far as it goes east, then walk. The bridge approaches from below. You feel it before you see it. This tower, this stone tower, Gothic arched, rising above the surrounding buildings like something from a different category of built things, too large, too permanent, too confident in its own existence. Then you come round a corner and see the whole span. And you stop. The Brooklyn Bridge in 1913, 30 years old. The longest suspension bridge in the world for 20 years until other bridges came along. And it still doesn't matter because no number describes what it looks like. The cables, the way they fan out from the towers in straight lines that become something like a harp. They go up and they go up and they converge at the tower tops, and somewhere in that geometry there is a principle being demonstrated about what tension can hold, about weight and force and the question of whether a thing can stay up. The answer for 30 years has been yes. You start walking. The pedestrian path is in the middle, above the traffic, above the horses and carts below, above the cable cars on their tracks. You're walking above the world, the East River below you, ships, small from this height, but you can see the smoke from their stacks. The water is dark and fast, and the current is visible even from here, always moving, always pulling toward the harbour, toward the ocean. Manhattan behind you when you're halfway across. You turn and look. The city. The lower Manhattan skyline in 1913 is not the skyline you may have seen in photographs from later decades. There is no Empire State Building, no Chrysler Building. Those come later. But there is the Singer Building, 14 years old and still remarkable, its tower rising above everything around it. The Woolworth Building, just completed in April, the tallest building in the world, 60 stories. Its neo-Gothic spire visible from where you're standing on the bridge, and below the towers, the dense horizontal mass of the rest of the city, the tenements, the factories, the warehouses, the churches, the streets that from up here look like the lines in a hand, deep and complicated and running everywhere. You can see Hester Street from here, not individual carts, not individual people, but you know where it is by the density of it, the particular compactness of those blocks. Somewhere down there, Mrs. Kaufman's kitchen, the stove going, the challah from this morning still on the counter. Somewhere down there, the back room where you sleep, the tin box with the recipes, and somewhere beyond the edge of visible, the Atlantic Ocean, and beyond that, Bialystok. You stand on the Brooklyn Bridge in October 1913 and hold both of these things in your mind at once. The city behind you and the city you came from, the smell of the river and the smell of your grandmother's kitchen, the cables above you, 30 years old, still holding everything up. It's that recent, that real. You came here on a boat that your grandparents could not have imagined, to a city being built in real time, to a bridge that men built with their hands and their mathematics and their refusal to believe the thing couldn't be done. And you cook food from a book your mother wrote. Both of these things are happening at once. In November, Leah from the factory mentions a settlement house on Henry Street. They teach cooking there, she says. Cooking, you repeat. American cooking. How to make American food so we fit in better. You think about this. Do the women want to learn American cooking, Leah considers? Some. Mostly they want to eat. The settlement house also gives out food when things are difficult, and there's a nurse who comes twice a week. You know about the Henry Street settlement. Lillian Wald runs it, a woman you know from the newspapers, from the Yiddish press, from the hushed, respectful way Mrs. Kaufman says her name when she comes up in conversation, which is the tone of voice you use for people you consider real. The cooking classes are Tuesdays at 2. You ask Mrs. Kaufman. She looks at you for a moment. What will you learn there that you don't know already? American cooking. How to use American ingredients properly. She considers this. Go. Be back before 4. The potatoes don't peel themselves. The settlement house on Henry Street is a brick building on a quiet block, clean and orderly in a way that most buildings in this neighbourhood are not. Window boxes with late autumn plants that haven't quite given up yet, a brass nameplate by the door, the sense of a building being seriously used. The cooking class is in a large kitchen on the ground floor. 8 women, various ages. 2 speak English well, the rest are at different stages. The teacher is a young woman named Miss Hartley, American-born, trained as a home economist, a discipline that has decided in the early 20th century that cooking can be made scientific, that nutrition and efficiency can be applied to the immigrant kitchen, that what the Lower East Side needs is better knowledge of how to cook inexpensively and nutritiously. Miss Hartley's enthusiastic. She's also, you realise quickly, not a particularly good cook. She knows theory very well. She can tell you the caloric value of a potato, and the protein content of a bean, and the correct technique for making a white sauce using American flour and American butter. She's read all the books, but she adds salt after tasting, and adds it in the wrong amount and then adds more, which means she's adding salt reactively rather than building it improperly. This tells you something, but you listen, because she knows things you don't. She knows, for instance, that American flour, the difference you've been tasting for 6 months, is indeed different from European flour. She has a technical explanation. American wheat has higher protein content, which creates more gluten, which is why the bread behaves differently. She suggests compensating by using slightly less flour per recipe, adding water gradually. You had arrived at a similar conclusion through trial and error over 6 months. But she has the explanation. She knows that American potatoes, higher water content as you suspected, require longer cooking when making kugel, or need to be pressed to remove excess moisture first. She knows that commercial American yeast behaves more aggressively than the fresh yeast most immigrants have been using, rises faster, so you need to monitor more carefully. All of this, useful, all of this, the reason your recipes have been wrong in ways you could taste but not name. You write down everything she says, not on the settlement house's paper, in the back pages of your mother's recipe book, the blank pages at the end that your mother left there. Your mother's book expanded, the old country recipes and the new country explanations in the same handwriting, different pens, your mother's rounded script, your tighter hand, but the same book. You ride the streetcar back to Orchard Street with the book in your lap and your hands smelling of the white sauce they practiced making, which was decent. November becomes December. The kitchen changes. In summer, the kitchen is your enemy. Too hot by mid-morning, a room that tests your endurance. In winter, the kitchen becomes something else. The warmest room in the building. The only room sometimes that isn't actively cold. The tenement doesn't heat well. The coal stove in the front room works for the boarder's communal space, but the back rooms, your room, the narrow corridor, get what heat filters through walls and floors. It filters imperfectly. You find your shoes in the morning with the leather stiffened by cold. Your washing water has a thin skim of ice some mornings, which you break with your fist the way Mrs. Kaufman showed you. The sound of ice cracking the first sound of the day. But the kitchen, warm, the stove burning all day, the walls absorbing the heat of months of cooking and holding it at night. The kitchen smells different in winter, the coal smoke more present, the cold outside making you notice the warmth inside, the contrast sharper. You cook heavier things. The body wants different food in winter, more fat, more starch, more of the things that take the cold out of the bones. The coolant becomes more important. The bean soup, thick, nearly a stew with whatever bones Mrs. Kaufman can get from the butcher, cooked until the marrow has dissolved into the liquid and the beans have absorbed everything and the pot is more solid than liquid. You eat this and feel your body accept it the way a cold house accepts fire. Gratefully, completely. The chala, buckwheat groats, toasted in a dry pan until they smell nutty and slightly smoky. You have to watch this. The difference between perfectly toasted and burned is perhaps 90 seconds, then cooked in chicken broth until each grain has absorbed the liquid and is separate but tender. The texture of properly made kasha, slightly chewy, with a roasted quality underneath the softness. Mrs. Kaufman adds caramelized onion, cooked very slowly in Schmaltz until nearly brown, sweet and collapsing, which goes on top of the kasha at serving, along with a small piece of chicken if there is one. When you first made kasha properly, months of trying, months of it coming out either mushy or dry, you stood at the stove and tasted it and said nothing, just stood there. And Mrs. Kaufman came over and tasted it and also said nothing for a moment. Then, better. High praise. On a Wednesday evening in December you write a letter. You do this by the gas lamp at the kitchen table after dinner, when Mrs. Kaufman is in the front room reading and the men are in their rooms. The building quiet in its relative way. The paper is the cheap kind, purchased from the stationery store on Rivington, thin enough to feel fragile. The pen is a shared pen, kept with the household accounts. You write in Yiddish, "My dear Mama." The salutation takes a moment. You've started letters 6 times in the past 3 months and stopped after a paragraph, because you didn't know what to say, or rather, you knew too much to say and couldn't find where to start. I am well and working and not hungry. This is the important thing I want to tell you first. I work for a Mrs. Kaufman on Orchard Street, which is in the Jewish neighbourhood here, which is very large. Larger than our whole city, I think. Or at least it feels that way. I cook and clean and help in the kitchen. Mrs. Kaufman is from near Lodz, and she is strict but fair, and she feeds us well. I have been trying to make your stuffed cabbage. I will tell you honestly, it is close but not right. I think the problem is the tomatoes and possibly the water. I want to ask you, do you add a small piece of sour apple to the sauce? I think I remember this, but I'm not sure if I imagined it or if it's real. The city is impossible to describe to someone who hasn't seen it. You know this, but you try anyway, because the alternative is not trying. The city is enormous and loud, and it never becomes quiet, not even at night. The bridge, there is a great bridge here over the East River, stone towers and steel cables, much larger than anything at home. You can see it from the roof. I went across it once. You can see all of Manhattan from the middle. I am learning things. English. How American flour behaves differently than ours. How to cook a chicken for broth so it gives more flavour even though American chickens are different. I carry your recipe book everywhere. I have not yet made the honey cake. I am saving it for Rosh Hashanah next year when I'm sure I can make it correctly. Please give my love to Father and to Basia and to Grandmother if she is well. I'm sending $4 in this envelope. I miss you. I miss the kitchen. Your daughter, Sonia. You fold the letter. Seal the envelope. Write the address in your most careful hand. The address of the house you grew up in a city you may never see again. On Saturday, you'll take it to the post office on Canal Street, where there's always a line of people doing the same thing, sending money and words back across the ocean to people who are waiting. On a Thursday evening in January, there's a fire. Not in your building. 3 buildings down on Orchard Street, a fire starts on the 4th floor at around 7 in the evening and climbs quickly to the 5th. By the time the fire company arrives from the station on Delancey Street, the building is a serious problem. You hear the alarm first. Then the change in the street sounds, the quality of urgency spreading through a neighbourhood the way spilled water spreads. You're in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes. Mrs. Kaufman goes to the window. Fire, a real one. The smell reaches you before you can see anything. Smoke, but also the particular sharp smell of burning building materials, wood and plaster, and the contents of other people's lives turning into heat and ash. The men are already at the building's windows. Hirsch Rosenblum comes back from the window with a face that has gone very careful, very still, the way his face goes when something triggers the specific fear that lives in people who work in factories. He worked at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory on Washington Place. He worked there in March 1911. He was not there on the afternoon of March 25th, 1911, because that was a Saturday, and he had taken the day to visit a cousin in Brooklyn. 146 workers died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Most of them were young women. Most of them were immigrants. The doors were locked. Some accounts say to prevent workers from taking breaks without permission. The fire escapes were inadequate. The building burned fast. Hirsch Rosenblum was not there. He doesn't talk about this. He has never said a word to you about it. But you know, because Leah told you, and Leah knew, because her friend worked in the building adjacent. You stand in the kitchen and smell the smoke from 3 buildings away and think about the locked door. You've been in buildings with locked doors. Every factory worker in this neighbourhood has. It's standard practice. Supervisors lock them. Owners lock them, and the reason given is always something administrative, and the real reason is always control. Control of the workers, of their breaks, their movements, their ability to leave. The fire, 3 buildings down, burns for 2 hours. 2 floors gutted. No one dies. The street fills with the building's residents, their possessions in their arms, standing in the cold January air watching their home burn. Mrs. Kaufman brings soup. This is what she does. When there's disaster on the street, she makes soup. Extra soup, quickly. She has the base already going, adds more water, more beans, whatever she has. You help carry it down in 2 large pots with bread, and you stand on the street in January and ladle soup into cups and broken bowls, and whatever the displaced families have on hand. People eat standing up in the cold. Some are crying. Some are just staring at the building. One old woman has brought a samovar from her apartment, carried it out before anything else, and it stands on the sidewalk next to her like an old friend. Eat, Mrs. Kaufman says to a woman holding a baby who is staring at nothing. Eat. The woman eats. You ladle soup. The cold is serious. Your breath clouds in the air. Your hands stiff around the ladle handle. The soup steaming in the January darkness. 40 minutes to empty both pots. Upstairs, washing out the empty pots in the cold kitchen, you think about Leah. Leah, who works in a shirtwaist factory on Green Street. Leah, whose supervisor makes lists. Leah, whose hands are stiff in the morning from the machine. You think about her sitting at the dinner table twice a week, eating Mrs. Kaufman's food quickly in the efficient way she has, the way of someone who expects food to be taken away before they're finished. The way of someone who is always slightly hungry, always slightly cold, always slightly afraid. You think about what it would take to make her safe. The answer, in January 1914, is the Union. The International Ladies' Garment Workers Union, which exists, which has organised strikes that have won things. Shorter hours, some safety improvements, the basic dignity of a door that can be opened from the inside. Leah has not joined the list. You don't know what you can do about this. You're a cook's helper. You're not in a factory. You don't have leverage. But you think, the food is something. Every meal Mrs. Kaufman's kitchen produces, every pot of soup, every chala, every Friday night cholent, that is something. It's not safety legislation. It's not a union contract. It's not a building with unlocked doors, but it's what you have. A bowl of soup on a cold sidewalk to a woman holding a baby watching her home burn. It matters. Spring comes late to New York. Or rather, spring exists theoretically in March but doesn't arrive as a physical reality until April, when you wake up one morning and realise the draft through the cracked plaster isn't cold anymore. Just cool. Moving air that doesn't hurt. You've been here a year. You notice this on the morning you've decided was your anniversary. The day in April you set as the marker, because you don't know the exact date of your arrival at Ellis Island, only that it was spring, and the harbour smelled like salt and diesel, and everything was enormous, and you had been on a boat for 16 days. 1 year. What you know now that you didn't know then. Which suppliers pad their invoices and by how much. Which fish at the Hester Street market was actually fresh this morning, and which was yesterday's being sold as today's. How to tell the difference between properly cured herring and improperly cured herring by smell alone, without touching it, from 3 feet away. Which of the 14 boarders has allergies? Mendel Gross cannot eat anything with mushrooms, because of a childhood incident he is never fully explained. You learned this only by watching his face when the mushroom barley soup was served. Now you keep a small bowl of plain barley soup aside for Friday evenings. He has never mentioned this. You have never mentioned it. It just happens. How to make chala that rises correctly with American flour. Slightly less flour, slightly more yeast, slightly shorter second rise. The result is not your mother's chala. It's something else. It's yours. How to bank the stove for overnight cooking without supervision. How to talk to Mrs. Kaufman when she's in what Mendel Gross calls a mathematical mood. The state she enters when the budget is tight and she's running calculations in her head and needs silence to finish them. How to say 17 things in English that matter. Good morning. How much? Too much. That's fine. Thank you. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Next week. Can you tell me? I work at, I live at, not today. How much did you say? Wait, please. Yes. No. The most important words in any language. How much? Too much. Wait. No. On a Saturday night in April, Mendel Gross brings tickets. This has never happened before. Mendel is a man who keeps himself carefully within a specific space, quiet, present, respectful of the lines between border and household. He says good morning. He thanks you for the soup. He occasionally tells you, with no preamble, a fact he's encountered that he thinks you might find interesting, and then goes away before you have to respond to it. The theatre tickets appear on the kitchen counter on Saturday morning. 2 tickets. The Thalia Theatre on Bowery. A performance. The printing is in Yiddish, and the title is too long for you to read quickly. Mrs. Kaufman looks at the tickets, looks at you, says nothing. In the afternoon, Mendel appears in the kitchen doorway. Mrs. Kaufman, hat in hands. If Sonia has the evening, there's a performance at the Thalia tonight. I thought it would be educational. Mrs. Kaufman considers this in a long, complete silence. Be back by 11, she says. The Thalia Theatre on Bowery. You've walked past it every week for a year and never been inside. It's been a Yiddish theatre since 1879, one of the original venues of the Yiddish stage in America, which is its own enormous story. The building is narrow from the street but deep, and when you step into the lobby, you understand immediately that this is a serious place. The crowd. The crowd is everyone. Factory workers in their good clothes and merchants in their real good clothes, and women who have been saving for weeks, and women who got in free because they know someone, and men who have been arguing about the play for 3 weeks already, because they saw the announcement and read the reviews in the Yiddish papers. The Yiddish theatre in 1913 is not a highbrow affair. It is popular theatre, melodrama and comedy, and serious drama and song, sometimes all in the same evening, serving an audience that is mostly literate and mostly politically engaged, and very much in need of a place where it can be itself. The smell of the theatre, tobacco, perfume on the women who have it, the warmth of many bodies, the particular dust of old curtains and old seats, the sound, 600 conversations happening simultaneously in Yiddish. You sit down in your seat, and for a moment you have the same feeling as the pickle brine, the same feeling as your grandmother's kitchen. You're somewhere that recognizes you. The performance. It would take too long to explain the plot. It involves an immigrant family, a conflict between generations, a young woman who wants to be American, and a mother who wants to stay herself, which is every immigrant story in one form or another. What you remember most is a scene in the second act, the stage kitchen, a woman at a stove, her daughter watching. The mother is teaching the daughter a recipe. You can't see what she's making, but the actress's hands move with a knowledge of someone who actually knows how to cook. The specific way she holds the wooden spoon, The tilt of the pot to check the liquid level, the motions you know. The daughter is trying to write it down. The mother says, you lean forward to hear. You can write it down, but it won't help you. The recipe lives in the hands. I can give you the words, but the hands you have to learn yourself. The audience is very quiet. Not all of them. Some people are still talking because in 1913 theatre audiences are not particularly disciplined about silence. But the women around you, quiet. You look at your hands in your lap, the hands your mother gave you, the hands that have peeled potatoes, kneaded bread and made stuffed cabbage that is very good but not quite right, the hands you're still teaching. On the walk home, Mendel Gross is quiet for half a block. Then, my mother used to say that the recipe is an address, he says. Not instructions, an address. It tells you where you're trying to go. Getting there is different every time. You think about this. Does she still cook, you ask? He doesn't talk about his family. You know there is family still in Poland. She died 2 years ago, before I could send for her. You walk another block. I'm sorry, you say. He shrugs, a small shrug. She knew I was coming. She knew I was here. Another half block. The mushroom soup, he says, on Fridays. She made it the same way. You don't say anything. With the pearl barley and the parsnip. Yes, it's right, he says. Not, it's the same. It's right. You don't have a response for that fits on a sidewalk on a cold April night. You walk back to Orchard Street. The years in the Lower East Side pass differently than years anywhere else. They pass fast because the work doesn't stop. The kitchen doesn't close, the bread doesn't make itself. There is always the next thing, the next meal, the next shopping trip, the next bushel of potatoes, the next batch of soup. And they pass slow because every day is fully occupied. The hours have all their contents. You are, by the end of your second year, someone who fills time differently than you did in Bialystok. Their time was sometimes empty, sometimes waiting. Here, time is a resource more precious than money. There is always something it could be used for. You become better. This is the simplest way to say it. You become better at this. The cooking, the managing, the negotiating with suppliers, the understanding of what 14 men need from a kitchen, in terms not just of calories, but of the other thing, the comfort thing, the recognition thing, Mrs. Kaufman notices. She says nothing in the way she says nothing when things are going well. But she gives you more responsibility quietly, by simply assuming you'll handle it, and then seeing if you do. The first time she leaves you alone for a full day, she goes to her sister and doesn't come back until evening. You make dinner for 14 men from scratch, alone. The soup, the kasha, the chala from the week before that needs to be used. Dinner is good. She comes back, sees the empty pots, sees the men eating. Good, she says. She takes off her coat. That night you lie on your cot in the back room and feel something that takes a while to identify. It is not quite pride. It's something quieter. Something more like arrival. Your cousin Fanya's husband Mordecai finds you a different opportunity in the spring of your second year. A restaurant on 2nd Avenue. Better pay. More interesting work. You go to see it. The kitchen is larger, the pace is faster, the money's $3 more a week. You stand in that kitchen for 20 minutes talking to the owner. You go back to Orchard Street, you stay. You're not entirely sure why, except that you know the smell of Mrs. Kaufman's kitchen when the chala is in the oven. You know the weight of the large copper pot. You know how the stove behaves on a cold morning. You know which suppliers to trust and which ones to watch. You know the 14 men's preferences and allergies and the look on Hirsch Rosenblum's face when the food is wrong. You know this place. You could learn a new place, you could adapt. But there is something in the known place that matters to you. The continuity of it. The way this specific kitchen, with its specific smells and its specific character built up from years of cooking, is something you've become part of. You stay. Mrs. Kaufman says nothing when you tell her you're not leaving. She nods once, in the way that is a complete sentence. In the autumn of your second year, a woman comes to Mrs. Kaufman's door. Not a boarder, a widow woman, newly arrived from somewhere in Ukraine, speaking a different Yiddish dialect, uncertain and thin in the way of people who've been travelling badly for a long time. Her name is Gittel. She has a daughter, 8 years old, named Razel. She has no money. Mrs. Kaufman knows her from a connection through the synagogue on Ludlow Street. She needs work. She needs food. Mrs. Kaufman takes her into the kitchen. You watch this happen. Mrs. Kaufman sits Gittel at the kitchen table and gives her bread and tea, and doesn't ask any questions for 20 minutes. Just eat. Gittel eats with the focused efficiency of someone who has been not eating for a while. The 8-year-old Razel sits beside her and eats with exactly the same focused efficiency. Then Mrs. Kaufman asks the questions. Not really questions. More. She says something and then waits, and the waiting is comfortable enough that the person fills it. You can cook, she says. It's not a question. It's an invitation to confirm. Gittel says, I can cook. I cooked for a household of 9 in Poltava. I can make... She lists things. An inventory of a kitchen. Beet borscht. Holishkis. Blintzes. Kugel. Roast chicken. Gefilte fish in the local variation. Carrot. Zimmers. Mrs. Kaufman listens to this list the way a conductor listens to an audition. Can you make borscht that's actually sour, she asks. Not sweet. I can make it any way you want. I want it sour. Then I'll make it sour. A pause. The little girl, Mrs. Kaufman says. Does she eat? Gittel looks at her daughter. She eats what there is. That's not what I asked. She doesn't complain. That's also not what I asked. Gittel looks at Mrs. Kaufman for a moment. Something in her expression loosens slightly. She eats when she eats. She doesn't always eat enough. Mrs. Kaufman nods, stands up, goes to the shelf above the stove, gets a bowl, ladles soup, the mushroom barley from this afternoon still warm. She puts it in front of Razel. Eat, she says. Razel looks at her mother. Her mother gives the smallest of nods. Razel eats. Gittel works for Mrs. Kaufman. She sleeps in the back room with you. The cot becomes 2 cots, one of them improvised from a board and folded blankets, and Razel sleeps on the improvised one. The room is crowded. You've been in smaller spaces. The kitchen becomes, with Gittel in it, a different thing. Not a worse thing. A larger thing. 2 different cooking traditions in the same space. 2 different people's instincts about how to handle a pot. 2 different regional variations of recipes that are technically the same but aren't. Gittel's borscht. You've made borscht. Mrs. Kaufman has made borscht. You know borscht. Gittel's borscht is different. It starts the same way. Beets, obviously. The deep purple-red beets that bleed into your hands when you cut them, that stain the cutting board and your fingernails for 2 days. But she adds something at the end. A specific proportion of vinegar, and a small amount of sugar and a final addition of beet kvass that she makes by fermenting the beet scraps in water. a process that takes 3 days and produces a liquid so sour it makes your jaw tighten when you taste a spoonful straight. The result is borscht with a sourness that is not sharp but deep. Not vinegar sour, but fermented sour, which is a different kind, more complex, more alive. The men eat it in silence. "Where is this from?" Mendel Gross asks, holding the bowl with both hands. "New recipe," Mrs. Kaufman says. He looks at you, you look at Gittel. Gittel says nothing, eating her own soup. "It's Poltava style," you say, "with beet kvass." He nods, goes back to eating. After dinner, he says to you quietly, "Tell the cook it's right." You tell Gittel. She looks at you for a moment. Then she goes back to washing dishes. But there's something in her posture that wasn't there before. Something slightly more settled. This is what the kitchen does. This is the only thing that matters in the kitchen. There are nights when the kitchen is yours alone. Not often, but sometimes. A Friday night when Mrs. Kaufman and her sister stay out late. When Gittel has taken Reisel to visit someone. When the men are all in their rooms or at the tavern. There are nights when the kitchen is empty and the stove is going and there is nobody watching and nothing required. On these nights, you cook for nobody. This sounds like a waste. It probably is a waste. The ingredients cost money, the fuel costs money, the time could be spent sleeping. But on these nights you open the recipe book and you try things. The honey cake for Rosh Hashanah. You've been waiting 2 years to make it. Waiting until you were sure you could do it correctly. You make it on a Thursday night in September. The house quiet, using the recipe exactly as written the first time to see what happens. It comes out right in flavour, slightly wrong in texture, too dense in the centre. You make notes in the back pages. Possible causes, oven temperature too high, or baking powder interaction with the American flour, or the honey variety. Second attempt 3 weeks later. Lighter honey, slightly lower oven temperature, divided between 2 pans instead of 1. Better. The centre cooked through. The flavour, the dark, spiced, sweet, bitter flavour of lekach. Almost exactly right. You eat a piece standing at the kitchen counter at 11 o'clock at night and you think, yes, not. It's exactly as I remember. Because it isn't, quite. But yes, this is right. This is the thing. This is the taste that means Rosh Hashanah. That means the year turning. That means your mother's kitchen in late summer with the windows open and the smell of apples from the trees outside. You've translated it. It's not the original, but it's faithful. You write in the recipe book, third attempt, correct. American flour, light honey, 2 pans, 325 degrees. Your mother's recipe with your annotations. On one of these nights, late autumn, the winter cold coming, the wind off the East River finding every gap in the building, you sit at the kitchen table after everyone is asleep and read the recipe book from the beginning. All 53 recipes, your mother's handwriting, the annotations, the smudges, and in the back, your additions, the settlement house notes, the adjustments you figured out, the records of what worked and what didn't. The book has doubled in length. Your mother wrote 53 pages. You filled another 40. It is becoming something. It is still your mother's book, but it is also yours, the original recipes, faithful to what was, and the adaptations, the translations, faithful to what is. A kitchen in Bialystok, 1890. A kitchen on Orchard Street, 1914. The same recipes, changed. The same taste, approximate. The same food, adjusted for different water, different flour, different fire. something carried across an ocean and put down in new soil and made to grow in a different direction. You put the book down. The stove ticks as it cools. The cold presses at the windows. The city outside is never fully quiet, but it is as close as it gets. The small hours of the morning when even New York takes a breath. You sit at the kitchen table in the warm room. A letter arrived last week from your mother. She answered your question about the stuffed cabbage. Yes, she adds a small piece of sour apple to the sauce. She thought you would have figured it out by now. She's sorry to hear the tomatoes are wrong there. She says, cook the sauce longer, let more of the water cook out, and the flavour will concentrate and the apple will help. She is well. Your sister Basia is engaged to marry. Your father's back has been bothering him. Your grandmother is still alive, 91 years old and asking about you. At the bottom of the letter, in slightly larger writing than the rest, keep the book. Add to it. It belongs to you now as much as to me. You fold the letter and put it in the tin box next to the recipe book. Tomorrow there are potatoes to peel. There are always potatoes. Tomorrow Mrs. Kaufman will be up before 5 and the stove will need loading, and there will be 14 cups to fill, and 14 pieces of bread to slice, and the morning will begin in the cold and the dark the way mornings always begin. Tomorrow there will be a Hester Street market to navigate, herring to inspect with appropriate skepticism, dried mushrooms to bargain for, a chicken to evaluate in Mrs. Kaufman's serious private way. Tomorrow Razel will come into the kitchen before school in her coat and her boots. She goes to the public school on Rivington Street now, where she's learning English with the terrifying efficiency of 8-year-olds, and she will stand in the warm kitchen for the 8 minutes before she has to leave, eat whatever is there, and watch you work with eyes that are taking everything in. You've started talking to her while you work, not teaching exactly, just narrating. This is how you know if the onion is ready, when it's soft and starting to go yellow at the edges. Not brown, yellow. Brown is too far, she watches. This is why you add the dill at the end and not the beginning. At the beginning it loses everything, at the end it keeps its smell, she watches. Your mother's voice in your hands, your words in her ears, something passing forward, but that's tomorrow. Tonight you blow out the lamp. The kitchen goes dark except for the thin red glow from the stove grate, the fire banking down, the coal doing its slow work through the night. The smells settle around you. Bread from this afternoon, onion, the faint char of coal, the particular smell of Mrs. Kaufman's kitchen in winter, thick and warm and layered with everything that has been cooked in it. Your room, your cot, the thin blanket pulled up. Your hands smell of garlic. Your hands always smell of garlic now. You've stopped noticing. The recipe book is in the tin box on the shelf above the cot. 53 recipes your mother wrote, 40 of yours. Your hands have learned things they didn't know in Bialystok. Your nose has learned differences that don't have words yet. Your body knows how to stand at a stove for 8 hours without thinking about it. You're a different person than the girl who got off the boat. Not entirely different. Still made of the same materials, still carrying the same things. But the things you're carrying have been translated, they've been put through the American kitchen, through the Hester Street market, through the coal stove on Orchard Street, through 14 men who needed to eat and smell something they recognized and feel for an hour that the world was the same world they grew up in. They're not quite the same things anymore, but they're still here. The city sounds come through the window. slightly muffled by winter, a cart on the cobblestones, a voice, far away, calling something in Yiddish. The ship horns in the harbour. You've learned to hear them without noticing, the way you've learned to hear the buildings cough and the baby above and the couple who argues in the procedural way. But they're there. The boats on the East River, the harbour beyond, the Atlantic beyond the harbour, and beyond that. You close your eyes, the warm room, the smell of yesterday's bread, and the bread you'll make tomorrow, the weight of the blanket, your hands at rest. Your mother gave you a kitchen in a tin box. You brought it across an ocean and put it down in new soil. It's growing something here, not the same thing, something adjacent, something that has roots in the same place but grows in a different direction. Because the light is different, the water is different, the air is different. Something new made from something old. That's what they all did. Everyone in every kitchen, on every floor of every building, on every block of this square mile of lower Manhattan. Every woman at every stove. Every pot of borscht that wasn't exactly the borscht from home. Every chala that rose differently because of the American flour. Every stuffed cabbage made with American tomatoes, and finally the small piece of sour apple, your mother's secret, confirmed in a letter that arrived in October. The apple, you know for next time. The sounds fade. Or maybe you're just listening less. The boundary between here and asleep starts to blur. The line between the kitchen smell and the smell of somewhere you used to be. It shifts. Your grandmother's courtyard, the pickle barrel, your mother's kitchen in the morning, the light through the window, the cast-iron stove she'd been cooking on for 20 years, the dock at Hamburg, the cold wind off the water, the boat, the harbour at New York, the enormous harbour, the towers in the distance, the thing you couldn't hold in your eyes all at once, the kitchen on Orchard Street. All of it existing at once, the way memories exist, not sequential, not logical, just present. Layer over layer, smell over smell. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a recipe book and a cot and a kitchen that knows you. You have hands that have learned things. That's more than a lot of people have. That's enough. Let the warmth hold you. Let the city quiet in its way. Let the smells settle. The bread, the garlic, the coal, the faint river smell that comes through every window in lower Manhattan if the wind is right. Let your hands rest. They've earned it. Let the stove tick as it cools. Let the building breathe around you. All the sleeping and the not quite sleeping, all the 40 families, all the 14 men with their quiet dreams, all the Bialystocks and Lodzes and Poltavas and Vilnas they carry with them, the recipes and the lost kitchens and the mothers they're trying to cook back into existence. Let all of it settle. Let sleep take you the way sleep takes a person at the end of a long day of useful work. Slow and complete and honest. Somewhere in the morning the call will come from the Ludlow Street shul, the sound that means the day is starting. The stove will need loading, the water will need fetching, the potatoes are waiting. But that's the morning. Right now there is only this. A kitchen that smells like somewhere you've been. A book full of recipes that remember a place, hands that have learned to translate. Rest. Centuries will pass. The neighbourhood you know will change beyond recognition. The tenements will come down. The pushcarts will be gone. The Yiddish theatre will close. The languages will shift. The streets will be paved in ways you can't imagine. But people will still cook on Orchard Street, still make soup from memory, still try to recreate something that tastes like before, something that places them in a room they can't go back to. Some things don't change. The human need for a place that recognizes you, that doesn't change. The way a smell can carry you across an ocean in half a second, that doesn't change either. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Sonia in her back room on Orchard Street 110 years ago. Let the world fade. Let the noise quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've earned this rest. Take it and dream of whatever dreams may come. Good night.